You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Knezik.
Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Knezik. Welcome to episode 60, another milestone.
Wow.
We're getting closer to 100. So
Are we going to make it?
Oh, yeah, we'll definitely make it. So within the year, right?
Awesome. Yeah. So I know I'm really excited about our guest today and I want to kick in. But first, I just want a quick shirt update. I've noticed some of our listeners on the Facebook Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group are starting to post photos that the shirts are coming out. I'm just curious if you have a update.
Yeah, so we're approaching $300 to donate. I think
Awesome.
It's like 30 some shirts have been purchased. So that's awesome. It slowed down definitely since our release, but like I said, I haven't really marketed it that much yet. So we still got to put it on our Pinelands Nursery Facebook page and on Instagram, and there's some places we need to put it out still. But always stay tuned, and we'll release it, or we'll let you know when these come up. But we are going to have some like nonprofit specific shirts that come out too.
And I can't wait. Those. We haven't even gotten ours yet, so I haven't even had a chance to wear them. But I did order one of the designs that we haven't released yet. So I'll have to keep that one secret until
we release it.
We release it. But I'm really excited. There's some great new designs coming, and I'm really excited that everyone's helping out some of these great nonprofits and other organizations by purchasing shirts so we can donate money. So 100% of the proceeds go to help these companies that come on to be our guests. So so we're excited and we'll keep that going. But
so we do have limited time today, so we want to keep this the beginning quick. So let's get into our introduction. There's two things that will come up quite a bit on our podcast. One of them being like habitat management or land management.
We get asked that
and then the other being Mount Cuba Center. So we figured, well, why not put those together and have on the natural lands manager from Mount Cuba Center to kind of talk about both. So Nate, why don't you give a better intro than I just did and tell us a little bit about Mount Cuba Center and then yourself as well.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, and I'm glad people are talking about Mount Cuba Center. That's good.
All the time.
So I'm the natural lands manager here at Mount Cuba. My name is Nate Shampine. I've worked here for 10 years now. So I'm just starting to learn the landscape a little bit and be able to make better decisions. So let me tell you a little bit about Mount Cuba. So we are a nonprofit conservation organization focused on native plants. So we're a botanic garden focused on native plants, supporting native plants, and building resilient, ecologically functioning landscapes. So we have around 50 acres of curated garden areas and a little over 1,000 acres of natural habitats that I manage.
Wow.
So even before that, Mount Cuba was kind of founded or started in 1935. Mr. and Mrs. Lamont DuPont Copeland purchased the property in 1935, built their large estate, and started acquiring land and preserving land up until today, 2020. So in 2001, Mrs. Copeland passed away, and we became Mount Cuba Center, the Botanic Garden.
Awesome.
I will say, for those of you listening who aren't from the Mid-Atlantic or Southern New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, you may have heard that DuPont name before, and it is connected to the company that you've heard from, and also connected to Longwood Gardens as well, right? But this is a separate property that's, in my opinion, really, really cool.
And the funny thing is, whenever I think of Mount Cuba, I think of the gardens, and I don't always think about the natural land. So I was hoping that we, obviously having you on, we're going to focus on that, but I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the natural lands and some of the interesting characteristics of natural. I was really shocked to learn that it was Appalachian. Where we're at, we're mainly coastal plain and just from Piedmont. So that it makes sense, but I just wasn't thinking about it. So I was hoping we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's perfectly normal. I hear that all the time. People know us for the gardens, but even more and more, thankfully, they're realizing we have 1,000 acres of natural areas, and we're managing those ecologically to support ecological function and systems. So, and it makes sense because up until recently, up until this year, actually in 2021, you weren't really allowed to visit the natural lands. When you came to visit Mount Cuba Center, you toured the gardens. You might have taken a class, but the only opportunity to get out into the natural areas portion of the property was to sign up with a private tour through me, or I would lead a handful of classes a year out there. So, but in 2021, just this spring, we opened up what we call our trails, and we expanded the garden experience out into the natural lands. And we've opened up 2 miles of trails, and you can see the rolling Piedmont, like you just mentioned, Fran. So we are in the Appalachian Piedmont, which is a unique geographic area.
Yeah.
And we're only, like you said, you think of like Delaware, New Jersey as coastal plain, but there's 5% of the state, the northern portion of the state, that is above that fault line. And we are in the Appalachian Piedmont. So we have unique plants and geology that are unique to us, that are found nowhere else in the state. So it's really a unique place.
Wow. Was it at one point not a plan to open the natural lands? Was that just a buffer, and then that mission changed over time, or was it always a plan to maybe open it, just wasn't ready?
Yeah, I think it was always in the back of our mind, and it just happened organically. You know, we kind of started small and core to the main house, and then we've slowly, as we've expanded guests, we've needed to expand our opportunities for guests and our experiences. So we have, slowly opened up areas away from the main house. And I think, so it was always kind of in the back of our minds. The more the natural lands has been managed and developed, the more we feel like, hey, this is important stuff we want to show people. So that was in the back of our head. And then I think COVID actually spurred a lot of it too. So more people wanted to get outside. We had to limit the number of people in our garden spaces with social distancing. So it was just a number of factors came together, said, hey, we are proud of our natural lands. We want people to see them. We also need people to space out in the garden. So let's open up some additional spaces for people to go see.
Wow. So as the land was originally purchased and then acquired over the years, was it already natural lands, or was it land that had to be converted to natural lands?
Yeah. So this area had been heavily impacted, just like everywhere in the mid-Atlantic, with European settlement, human development, fragmentation, farming. So all of this land, at the turn of the 1900s, had been cleared for agriculture for the most part. So a lot of the forests had been cleared, and this area was farmed right up until like the 1950s. So the Copelands, as farms were abandoned and farmers stopped farming, the Copelands slowly bought up that old farmland. And then we're in the process of restoring it and reverting it back to some sort of a semblance of what it once was.
Wow. And I would imagine that has to be challenging, especially now that it's open to the public. I would imagine 5 years ago, if it wasn't open to the public, it was a little bit easier to manage. Or is it? I'm just assuming.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that was one thing I was actually worried about, and one thing I didn't want to lose is my ability to manage the landscape like the way I wanted to and needed to. But also, I did want guests out there. So I kind of play this balancing act of, we do want people out there, we do want visitation while I'm doing my management.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, it hasn't been that bad. So the trails that we opened are through mainly old agricultural hayfields. We've been maintaining these kind of pathways or trails for the last few years anyway. So it was really getting people out there has been pretty minimal disturbance on both like our work that we need to get done and also like the ecology and wildlife factor too.
Now, I'm assuming it's not just you that's going and doing this stuff. It's a team of people. because I was going to say like 1,000 acres is a lot for you to manage on your own.
Yeah.
So how many people are you working with to keep the natural lands natural?
Yeah, it's a lot of land to manage. There's 4 full-time staff, myself and 3 others. And then each year we usually get a intern, summer intern or year-long intern, and we can hire some seasonal help. But there's 4 full-time staff that manage 1,000.
That's still a pretty small crew for that amount of space. So, but we'll get in some of the techniques you're using to do that.
But yeah, I just had one quick question, just to paint the picture for our listeners that have never visited. So you have the gardens, you have the 1,000 acres. What is the pressure like around the area? Is it developed or is it still natural land somewhat surrounding you?
We're pretty developed around us.
Okay.
So we're kind of this island of conserved land in the middle of development. So we're just outside of Wilmington, Newark, Delaware, and up on like the Brandywine area up on Route 202. I mean, it's pretty highly developed around us, but there are a few conserved properties throughout this region. So in this Red Clay Valley watershed, there's Mount Cuba Center, there's Winterthur, Longwood, Delaware Nature Society, Flint Woods Preserve. So because of the DuPonts and some other individuals in the area, there's been a lot of preserved and conserved land. And luckily we're all kind of contiguous in this strip up the Red Clay watershed. But other than that, it's pretty developed around us.
I live, and I know a lot of that, I would imagine, has to be more recent. I lived in Newark and worked at the Connor Pyle Company in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And I know going back to there now today compared to the late 90s, I don't even recognize it when I go back.
Yeah.
What was all open farm field is all houses now.
And it seems to be happening at an exponential rate, but just like everything else. But I think really since the 70s and 80s, it really picked up. Like if I talked to some people that had been here, for their entire lives, and, back in the 70s, if you lived in Hockessin or around this area, you were in the middle of nowhere, all farmland, and, nobody came out here. But now it's just these farm fields have been converted to housing developments and apartment complexes, and it's becoming, and unfortunately, pretty developed.
And that's the reason why we wanted to paint that picture, because we wanted to talk about some of the challenges it is to take care of these natural lands. So I would imagine with that development surrounding that, there has to be, I'm just assuming, increased deer pressure or something like that. Or do you have those challenges as a senior around? Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, that's probably one of the most challenging things. And I mean, I haven't been to everywhere in the country, but I personally feel I grew up in central New York, I've been out west and down south. This mid-Atlantic region is probably some of the highly disturbed landscapes around. And it's because of that disturbance, there's all these negative cascading factors, high deer populations, invasive plants, just poor soils that have been farmed for years and years and years. So managing land in the mid-Atlantic I personally feel is pretty hard.
I would imagine. What would be some of the other major challenges that you face? We want to go into all the positives. I'm just trying to paint a good picture of, it's a great mission to have, but I'm sure the start of it's not easy to get where you're at and then maintain it.
Yeah, so I guess for some of the biggest challenges is that disturbance, because the traditional, I guess, restoration approaches that you learn about in college and school and go to conferences, out in Illinois or in Missouri and hear about, those practices do not happen or the same way on my land. So that's been a huge challenge, is just like learning how our land, responds to restoration and different disturbances. Because I know, in other areas that have some remnant prairies out west, some of their restoration recommendations might be to till the soil or to disc. And that would be the last thing I would want to do on my landscape, because it's just been so highly disturbed that there's a load of invasive seed bank.
Mm-hmm.
So the last thing I want to do is disturb that seed bank. So it's kind of just the hardest thing is just to work the land and learn, Mount Cuba's landscape and how it responds.
So we mentioned invasive plants, and actually back up a little bit further than that. When Mount Cuba first started to develops the wrong word. What's the word I'm looking for, friend? When they started trying to reclaim and make this a natural land setting, what did it look like before? And then how did you get started? What was the first step?
Yeah. So, I use the term natural lands pretty loosely, at Mount Cuba. You'll see me do quotation marks all the time I speak, because nothing is, black and white or cut and dry or natural really anymore. So, I've only been working here 10 years. I want to, there was people working on the landscape prior to me. A lot of the land had just reverted naturally after those old farms had been abandoned. And then we kind of started our natural lands department, I would say 12 or 15 years ago, when we specifically focused a person out there managing the landscape with invasive species management. So there have been some people working prior to me, but I came on 10 years ago and was basically, just dealt this old historic agrarian situation where there'd been a lot of disturbance, a lot of land clearing, a lot of farming. So, and my goal is to slowly restore that and revert it back to like ecologically important habitats that support ecology. So it's a process, and I use a lot of ecological thinking and basic core ecological fundamentals of creating core chunks of habitats, linking habitats together through corridors, things like that, those core foundational ecological processes to help prioritize and set goals on the landscape as far as restoration.
So I guess I'll follow up with this and say, how much of it was like, well, from what I understand, some of these old fields where you basically have a field that was farmed and then you just stop farming it, you can get some really interesting early successional species pop up. A lot of that stuff's in the seed bank over time, and just it doesn't take that long for it to become a functioning habitat. Again, but where we are in the Mid-Atlantic, it might need a little bit of steering so that it doesn't become a poor habitat. So I guess what were some of the techniques? Like, I'm guessing you didn't go out and say, okay, this was a farm field and now we want it to be a meadow. Let's just go and plant the whole thing, especially with 4 people or 5 people. So how much of it was hands-on versus just letting nature do its thing?
Yeah. And I'll talk about a couple specific different scenarios maybe, or situations, and how I handled it. So I use the term managed succession because, just like you say, where we are, you can't just walk away from something and expect it to turn into a forest in 50 years. It just, because it's been so highly disturbed and fragmented and destroyed, basically, those processes don't happen like they used to. So we have to manage the successional process. So there are some areas that we want to revert back to either an early successional, maybe, or mid-successional shrub habitat. And then there's other areas that we want to revert back to forest, because one of our main goals of supporting ecological function is to have diversity of habitat types on the landscape. Within those habitat types, there's diversity of plants. So diversity supports diversity, and so on. So with diverse habitats, you have diverse plants and diverse fauna and so on. So if we are trying to build or allow a mid-successional shrub habitat, there's a lot of areas that we have just let old agricultural fields go through succession, but all the while we're very heavy-handed on what we allow and don't allow to come into that field. So each year, what I do pride ourselves on is we're very thorough and very targeted and good at what we do. And that allows us to manage the landscape with 4 staff. So each year, we know at a certain time, it's time for us to go in with either mechanical removal or some herbicides and spot treat out the bad plants, the non-native invasive plants that we don't want to succeed in the field, and not treat or allow the plants that we do want to come into the field. So it's just year after year of removing or spot treating or pulling or spraying the plants that we don't want to succeed into the field, and allowing the plants that we do want. So just year after year after year. Most of this stuff just takes time.
Yeah.
So through time, you will get, through the seed bank, a habitat or a situation that you are intending, but it just takes time. And I feel like that's where, projects fail. Either they don't have the time, they don't allow enough time for that process to take place, or they don't have the consistency back on those sites year after year after year to see that project through.
I think a lot of our listeners, we have a lot of listeners that have nice sized properties that they're trying to convert or maintain in natural lands. And I think they get overwhelmed of where to start, and because you want to see a difference immediately.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's not always easy to do that. So it's consistency is the main key, I would imagine.
I would say, yeah. And that's from my experience, having worked on the landscape for 10 years, I am now just starting to see a difference with just year after year after year of controlling some of these invasives and allowing the good native plants to grow. Yeah, I'm starting to see that develop now, and it takes 5, 6, 7, 10 years. And it is very easy to get overwhelmed, and that's the thing I hear too. Is like, whoa, like how do you manage all this? And I'm just overwhelmed. I have this property, it's just covered with whatever, Canada thistle or porcelainberry. And so it's just, you have to compartmentalize it, kind of break it down, and just chip away at it and be consistent over time.
And one of the biggest messages I'm taking away that's important for anything like this that you're saying is that you have to have a plan. You can't just go in and say, today I think I'll do this. No, it's a plan, and it's consistent to that plan. So
and that's definitely another thing I preach is setting goals and working backwards. So I rarely ever think about the first thing I think about is not like, what do I do? The first thing I think about is like, where do I want to be? So I'm often thinking, in restoration terms, in decades down the road. So what do I want this place to be in 50 years, 100 years even? And then working backwards, what do I need to do today to achieve that desired result? So it's often thinking backwards or starting at your goals that drive your decision making day to day, week to week, year to year.
Are you seeing a difference in your 10 years in the amount of invasive plant pressure that obviously you're getting better because of the consistency in the plan of it on your land, but are you seeing maybe on the boundaries, are you seeing a big difference, maybe an increase over the last 10 years of what's popping up, or is it, relatively the same?
I would say in my 10 years, it's probably relatively the same. What happens though often is where you had invasives before, maybe where you spent some time, there's not those invasives, but they pop up in new areas, or you do treat an invasive in a site, but it's replaced by a different invasive. Often like, oh, I'm going to go and kill all this Canada thistle in my field, but then it's still grass the next year or something else. So, I often trade invasives. I treat one and another one pops up, or areas, I treat Canada thistle in one portion of the field, and there was another portion that never previously had Canada thistle, and all of a sudden the next year there's Canada thistle over there. So it just seems like I'm getting ahead of it slowly, but always like finding new things and new places and chasing things around. So I mean, I feel people's like
we love what Delaware just did with the banning of invasive. Was it 25 or 30 invasives, the sale of and planting of? Is there anything that and I'm sure that's a huge win, especially in your area. Is there any plant that you can think of that you would have added to the list that wasn't on?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just getting back, yeah, that was great legislation. Mount Cuba was a big part of that. Some of our staff members were actually directly involved with recommending plants for the list.
Okay.
So that was a huge win, not only for us, but just ecology and the whole region. I think the list was pretty good. No, I can't think off the top of my head if there was one I would necessarily add to the list. I mean, there's definitely things that I see on our property because of the history of this land being disturbed and a gardened area for so long. We weren't always a native plant garden. We had non-native invasive plants early on before we knew they were, detrimental. So we still see a lot of those in the landscape, and we fight things at Mount Cuba that I don't see in other areas. Photinia villosa is a plant that we have that not many other people around me probably have to deal with. It's an ornamental plant. Some of the ornamental viburnums, Viburnum dilatatum, Viburnum plicatum, the double file viburnum I see a lot in the landscape. Burning bush, of course.
Yeah.
That's one that I have a hard time getting ahead of.
I mean, Viburnum plicatum and dilatatum are still landscape staples. And I understand that. That's one that people just, and again, it's another thing like barberry where they don't think it's invasive because they don't see it escaping their yard, but it is.
Which you are going to talk about. I meant to tell Fran this before, but I'm going to tell you right now. I think we do that as the next buzz, as the actual definitions of what invasive is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Nate, you probably see this on Facebook too. This has been really driving me nuts lately. But you have the people who are like, and it just happened the other day where I was like, oh, the plant you're talking about is actually an invasive plant. And especially you shouldn't be promoting it in a native plant setting. And they're like, well, I keep an eye on it and it's not invasive where I am. But that's not how it works. It's not invasive doesn't mean it's spreading in your garden. It means that birds are eating the seeds and bringing them to different places. It's moving other ways or wind blown. There's all different things.
I will say, and the plant was, I'm going to say what the plant was. It was Rosa Sharon. Now, my fiance's property right now, I took account after this, has over 20 Rosa Sharon on her property, none of which had been planted there. She didn't plant any of them. They just appeared. So, and every year there's more. so it's, but she also has a natural area that it's stabilizing in, not in a mode. Yeah, if it's seeding in your lawn and you're mowing your lawn, it's not going to come up. But we're allowed to come up.
Yeah, just like you mentioned, Fran. I mean, most people, I hear the same thing. Well, I didn't realize that was invasive. I have it in my yard and I never, I don't see it spreading. It's because they're in a highly manicured landscape where they're mowing their lawn continuously. They're weeding things out. I usually tell them, well, come to my woods. I'll show you that it's invasive. Yeah. Like burning bush is one, like, I have burning bush and I don't see it spreading around my yard. And I was like, well, I'll show you some woods where it's just 100% burning bush.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And Japanese barberry is another one, but
and
you go, Fran.
No, I was gonna say there's a park right down the street from here, and there's one strip along the park, a walkway of the park where it's a line of trees, and there's burning bush all under the trees because you can see that's where the birds were sitting, that's where they were dropping the seeds, and it's all the whole understory is nothing but burning bush, none of which were planted there. So you just have to look. Sometimes your eye doesn't see it, but once you notice it, like it focuses in, and then you're like, oh, there's more. So, I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off.
Oh, no big deal. It's one of my favorite phrases that is from Sam Droege, and he talks about editing out different plants and how, I guess basically he's referring to invasive control, but he's using editing out, and he'll talk either about mechanical or herbicide treatments to do that. What are the species you're fighting the most, and then are there any that are like particularly hard that you just can't get a hold of? Even through conventional methods?
So we use all the tools at our disposal to fight invasive plants. So we have like an integrated approach. There's mechanical removal you can do with chainsaws and bladed weed trimmers and loppers, like physically cutting things down. We also use herbicides and chemical control sparingly. It's definitely a tool in our toolbox, and managing 1,000 acres, we need to utilize it. I can understand if on your home landscape you just have a little bit of space, if you want to just not use herbicides and try to do it strictly mechanical, it's a little more feasible. But for us, it's not feasible. We can't be going back to that same site 5-6 times a year to cut things down.
The important thing, what you're saying is it's a tool in your toolbox. It's not the only tool in your toolbox. That's the big difference.
Yeah. So yeah, and oftentimes, so these chemical herbicides are really not usually the first thing I go to either, especially on larger woody shrubs like bush honeysuckle, Linacea macchii, or bush honeysuckle, multiflora rose, Japanese privet, winged euonymus. These plants are generally, when I find them, they're big. They're 6-7 feet, 12 feet high sometimes. So rather than going in with an herbicide and just spraying the whole bush, we'll generally either cut them down, so use mechanical removal first, and then apply herbicide to the stump, like a cut stump treatment. Or we'll cut them down and let them reflush, and then we'll just do a foliar application on the smaller reflush. Mm-hmm. It's this combined approach of mechanical removal, chemical removal, or mechanical removal and burning, that usually, like the 1-2 punch, is what's needed to kind of knock some of these out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the techniques I just saw recently on larger stuff, is to actually like girdle it with a chainsaw. Something so you're not actually even cutting it down, and then you're painting that basically the wound you just opened up, because the plant is going to be sending resources there then anyway. So it makes your herbicide more effective.
Yeah, and that's
you're not getting overspray. It's literally painted onto that stuff, sprayed just onto that area. So
yeah, and that's a great technique, especially for larger things, Norway maples, Atlantis, where these trees maybe are out of the way in a back area that aren't going to pose a risk once they die. You can often just score, like either with an axe or a hatchet or a chainsaw, just make some cuts in the bark, mm-hmm. and then inject the herbicide directly into that cut. So like you said, you're not using excess herbicide in the landscape, and it's translocated through the cambium layer up and down into the root system. So a great time to do that is in the fall. Fall, winter is a great time to do like stump treatments, when those plants are taking that energy back into the roots.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tom. No, I'm letting you go.
I was going to say the other thing that is a benefit is, especially like you said, it's out of the way or someplace you can afford to have that tree eventually fall. Well, now you created a whole bunch of different kind of habitat as well. So that's another benefit of doing it that way. And I should even explain girdling more. It'd be if you took a trees, well, all plants, I guess, well, trees in particular, they're using the bark as a protectant, but then just underneath, it's using it for nutrient flow and water flow. So by severing that, you're basically killing the tree by disrupting its process to make nutrients flow. So and live. So I don't know how many people at home actually know that's where the nutrient flow is not.
It's a xylem and phloem, correct?
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Bark,
So that was my basic way of trying to explain it. But maybe I could confuse more people than I intended doing that.
So you mentioned habitat as well. So, and I know we talked about deer. Do you manage deer pressure? Is that something? Do you have like deer fencing? Is that a management tool that you have in your arsenal also?
Yes. So one of our main goals is to support native plants and native, functioning ecosystems. A direct negative impact to supporting native plants are white-tailed deer. So high levels of white-tailed deer. So we, just like everywhere in the mid-Atlantic, through fragmentation, habitat loss, development, lack of hunting in some areas, deer populations have expanded, and they're at numbers, way exceeding, carrying capacity, 80, 100 deer per square mile. So when we do restoration projects, we have to do something. We have to protect the trees, the plants from deer pressure. So it depends on the situation. Sometimes in a small area, if we're doing a reforestation project, restoration with trees, we might cage individual trees to protect them from deer browse. Or if we're doing a larger area, it might be financially appropriate and make more sense just to cage the whole. And in that case, we might build, a few acre deer exclosure and then plant within that. So there's pros and cons, both monetary pros and cons, and then also how the land ecological response pros and cons. So when we're caging individual trees, the areas in between the trees are deer are still able to access those areas and browse. Mm-hmm. So we don't see the regeneration of other stuff like the natural succession in those areas because deer are still allowed in. But areas that we cage entirely and exclude deer, we definitely see more regeneration in between the trees that we planted. So you got to weigh the pros and cons, and it's kind of, again, like, what are your goals and what resources do you have available to you? But so we do have to protect everything we plant from deer. There's a few things. I know there's a lot of deer lists on deer resistant stuff, and some of it's good information, some of it's not. Some works with 30 deer per square mile, but not 100.
Yeah.
So you got to take all that with a grain of salt. But
the one beautiful thing about all the techniques that you've done for invasive plants and deer pressure and creating and protecting natural lands over the decades is the documentation that you have of what you've learned over all this time. So, we wanted to try to focus on some of the positives, if there were any significant or important findings that you've found over the last 20 years of great techniques or just certain things that you didn't expect to see.
I guess, kind of like I mentioned earlier, I think for me, I came into this wanting to see immediate results too. And so I came in and I would do things and I was like, it's not working. Like, what happened? Or I need to do something else. And I've just learned over the last 10 years, I need to be a little bit more patient and let the land's going to take time to respond. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at now in my career is I've just realized I need to be more patient and humans, like, people think on this short time frame, they want to see immediate results this year. And sometimes you can do that. You buy a bunch of plugs, pollinator plugs, and you put them in, and that summer they look pretty good. And the next year they look great. But with restoring like forests and doing invasive management and letting succession develop the landscape, it just takes time. So I guess that I would say one of the biggest things I've learned through land management is just to be patient. That's just
awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. What are some of the interesting plants you've seen pop up that just through these management practices that weren't there before, and then all of a sudden just kind of came in either through the seed bank or through other means?
I mean, we've definitely, we do prescribed fire here too, and we can talk about that and talk specifically about our deer management too, because I'm definitely a proponent of deer management. But so some of the plants, we've done some prescribed fire, and after a burn, we've seen some orchids pop up in different areas. So some unique orchids have popped up. And then just some common things too. I'm starting to see some of the native forest regenerating. So where it was very invaded before in the understory, and there wasn't a lot allowed to succeed, where we've done removals, I'm seeing hickories and oaks and some of those like native trees coming back in. So it's not always about, I rarely see like all this rare stuff pop up. It's usually just, I think it's success when I'm seeing some of that common native stuff come up too.
And where were you seeing the hickories and oaks pop up? I might have missed something.
In some of the forests that we've done some understory invasive removal in.
Okay, gotcha.
So previously it could have been, like I said, 100% burning bush. In areas we've been on it for 3, 4, 5, 10 years now, we're seeing little hickory saplings and oaks that are starting to come back. Also means our deer populations probably were at lower levels where it needs to be. So, I mean, all of these little key like things that I'm seeing in the environment lead me to, we're on the right track. It gives me hope just to keep doing what we're doing.
Given the age of the seed bank, any chestnuts pop up by any chance?
We haven't seen any chestnuts pop up. Okay. We do have, there are a few chestnuts locally. One thought to be, a native chestnut, and it's possibly blight resistant. It's pretty big. So our state botanist has taken some samples, and we've sent genetic samples off. So
Awesome.
I haven't seen any seedlings respond to our management.
Awesome.
So what are you guys doing for deer management? You brought up that you are managing that population, and then you did the exposures as well. But what are you guys doing?
So we have a pretty intensive deer management program. And it's one thing I again pride ourselves on, is that we are serious about deer hunting and serious about deer management. I don't want to eliminate deer. I know deer are native, natural part of the landscape, but their current levels are not native and natural. So I'm just trying to bring those populations back into balance and get them low enough levels where they're not impacting the ecology of the landscape as much. So we hunt pretty heavily with all sorts of means. Again, we hunt with crossbows and shotguns and bow and arrows, which are all legal in the state of Delaware. We have been issued crop damage permits. Our native plants are actually viewed as crops, thankfully, from the state of Delaware. So we get nuisance crop damage permits to protect our native plants, which extends our hunting season a few more, like another month or so in the summer, and a few months on the back end into the winter. So we can hunt deer at extended period throughout the year. We're allowed to bait. We do deer drives and hunt from tree stands. So pretty much from September on, it's one of our top priorities is to reduce deer population. And take it seriously, and we hunt hard.
Yeah. And so what's your current population and I guess your target population as well?
Yeah. So we actually do deer population estimates. There's a few different ways to monitor deer populations. You can go on, maybe do aerial surveys and physically count them, or do aerial surveys and use infrared remote sensing to count individuals, which happens a lot in wintertime. We use a technique called camera trap surveys, where we set out trail cameras, which are triggered by motion, throughout the property at these same sites at the same time every single year, and basically monitor our deer population that way.
Okay.
We use some of the male antler characteristics as like individual bucks, and then basically through our pictures and these formulas, we're able to determine our deer population going into hunting season. So we've been pretty stable at around 50 to 60 deer per square mile, which I think is pretty good, considering what it is around us in some areas, like, over near you guys or.
But that's with active management every day.
That's with active management. So with as hard as we hunt, we're maintaining about a 50 or 60 deer per square mile. If we didn't hunt or just took a couple of years off, that deer population would grow up to the 100 deer per square mile that you hear about in these others. So with our active deer management, we're maintaining about a 50 to 60 deer per square mile.
Wow. With other than humans, are there any active predator on the property that you've seen come and go? I know predators tend to travel. So
yeah. Up until a couple of years ago, no, but a couple of years ago, coyotes started showing up on the landscape. They were void in this area. We didn't have coyotes in Delaware, the northern part of Delaware. We had a lot of red fox, and they might take an injured fawn or something, but coyotes are definitely, a predator of deer. And we've had coyotes moving in the last couple of years. And we're kind of we see a few every year. So seeing them more on a regular basis. So they're starting to come around, and hopefully help us out with our management a little bit. It's very controversial. Of course, hunters don't like the coyotes. They want to see more deer, and land managers and ecologists want, that predator to come back into the system. So it's a little controversial, but I personally am glad, and I like seeing coyotes on the property. And I think we've been lacking that kind of mid-level, predator.
It's important to have that balance, and that's something that's been lacking. That's why the deer population is there's multiple reasons why it's out of control, but that's one of the reasons.
I didn't answer one of your questions was do we have target deer numbers, I think, or what are we trying to get down to? So I feel like we will never be at risk of eliminating the deer herd around our area. So basically every year we try to harvest them all. So knowing we're never going to do that, and even if we did, there's so much immigration from around us. These are areas outside of our land that cannot be hunted through regulations. So there are such high deer densities around us that even if we got down to 0 deer on our property through hunting season, through immigration, we would have a new population the very next year. So basically what our goal is to shoot as many deer as possible every single year, knowing that, we're never going to make that big of an impact on the herd, and really focus on the antlerless, the does in the population. So I require all of our hunters to shoot a antlerless deer, a doe, before they harvest a buck. So we really target the females in the population because we know those are the individuals, adding to the population.
Yeah, that's, it's, I guess even just maintaining that population every year is a win.
Yeah.
That, based on that, it's a win.
Yeah. And that's the research out of Duke Farms has said, like, you don't really get natural understory regeneration until you're below like 30 deer per square mile. Yeah. So that's still, you're double that. And where we are, we're what, double that?
Yeah.
So, I like I said, I am seeing oaks and things responding, and there's a lag time too. So again, with this, just being patient and letting the land respond is, it takes time for the land to recover. So even if you get your deer population down to where we are, 40, 50, 60 deer per square mile, we might not see those positive impacts, for 4 or 5 years down the road. The land is going to take time to respond to those lack of deer. So it's just,
I'm very happy to hear you mention prescribed burning, and it's, you need those different successions throughout. If you just had old growth forest, which is fantastic, but you need all those other stages as well. Can we talk a little bit about the prescribed burning, just what your mission is for that?
Yeah. So like I said, our main overarching goal is to support ecological function. And one way we do that is to maintain diverse habitats on the property. So we don't just want old growth forests. We want younger forest and mid-successional forests and early successional areas too. So one way we maintain our early successional habitats, our grasslands, is through prescribed fire. We do mowing and haying and also prescribed fire. So most of the land around our area does want to be forest. It wants to revert back to forest. So to maintain open grasslands, you need to incorporate some sort of disturbance. So that disturbance is often mowing. But in our case, we also use prescribed fire each year to introduce disturbance and reset the successional process. We never burn in the same, we usually don't burn in the same site 2 years in a row. If there's an area we burned last year, we'll either leave it alone this year or mow it. So all of the grasslands on the property are in some sort of rotation of management.
Awesome.
Yeah. So prescribed fire is just like invasive management with mechanical versus chemical. It's just another tool and has, sometimes different results. So it depends what you want to do. I use fire a lot in areas that I want to reseed. With plants, it provides a great seed bed. So there might be grasslands. If you mow it, you still have a lot of thatch on the ground and you still have all those little stems of grass on the landscape. And if you were to overseed or spread seed on that site, you're not going to get good soil to seed contact unless you kind of drill seeded it in. But even then you still have, all that above ground biomass. So often I use prescribed fire as a step to reseed a site. So I will burn off a grassland or burn off a hayfield, get down to that bare mineral soil, and then I'll spread the new native grass seed into that bare soil. So
awesome. To me, that's an important tool only because in this area, fires would naturally happen. It's something that, you look at our pine barrens and how they've evolved throughout the years. So you can't necessarily just remove that from an area. Because it's something I think that would naturally occur over time anyway if you're patient. So I'm happy to hear that that's one of the tools that you're using.
Yeah, and it works great for us. And then, I was talking about it in a grassland situation, but in the pine barrens, I mean, there's species that require and depend on fire for regeneration.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fire, I think it's being started to be thought about again, more and more and utilized more. There was the whole, Smokey the Bear and fires are bad in the early 1900s. But I think now that we understand ecological processes better, that we understand that fires are a natural part of the system, and used appropriately. There's great benefits with fire.
Now, we talked about some of the challenges that you have maintaining the natural lands. Is the natural lands surrounding the garden challenging for the gardens themselves? Do they have their own set of challenges just because of that area?
Yeah, I kind of smile because I hear that a little bit, like, your weeds are coming into my garden. So yeah,
two different missions basically.
Yeah, it's different missions, and it's just different scales of maintenance, I guess. So where in the gardens it's supposed to be gardened and a little bit more manicured, and we have a higher staff ratio per acre of land to maintain that area. So it's a little more highly manicured, but then they butt right up against the natural areas in some parts, and it's a little bit, it's less maintained and more invaded. So yeah, it is a little bit of a challenging where some of our non-native plants in our natural lands are coming into the garden space, but I guess it is what it is. And we do try to take care of the invasives right along the edge, so they're not feeling the pressure as much. But yeah,
I would imagine, like anything else, you just have to work together towards that common goal.
Yeah, we definitely work together on that space. And like I said, we do focus a little bit more effort right along the garden edge because we do not want to put that pressure on them. Unquote.
So we're getting close to the time we have to wrap up. So why don't we always end with two things. The first being, we want to know what your favorite native plant is. And then the second is, each one of us kind of gives a final thought to sum up the conversation, which this conversation probably could have gone another hour. So
yeah,
we're gonna have to
questions
do this again.
We didn't even get to, but
yeah, and I'm happy to. Tom, I don't know, Fran, if you can attach or please share my contact information.
We can definitely do that.
Funnel questions through me. I mean, any additional questions or comments, I'm happy to take.
We would love it. Well, we're going to put all the social media links on our website with the show notes, and we'll attach your contact information.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to squeeze this one in.
Yeah, I am too.
So what is your favorite native plant?
I get asked that a little bit, and I have a hard time with this one. I don't really have a favorite native plant. I have a lot of favorites, and the more I think about it, the favorite plants that I like to see or plant in the landscape are favorites of the fauna and that I'm trying to support. So I like things that bloom, that flower, that provide seed for wildlife. So some of my favorite, just kind of thinking down a list, some of my favorite plants. Just recently, Cephalanthus occidentalis is starting to bloom. I love Cephalanthus in a wet area. Bees, butterflies love the flowers on Cephalanthus. Viburnum prunifolium is another one, understory kind of small tree that flowers in the spring and produces berries in the fall for birds. Great understory native tree that doesn't seem to get browsed too heavily in my area anyway for deer. Of course, like big white oaks. I love mature white oaks. So kind of those workhorses. I like plants that support the ecosystem, the workhorses in the ecosystem, kind of the backbone of the, supporting the ecosystem. So.
And that black haw viburnum has a great fall color as well.
Yeah.
And that's, it's a little bit different than what you see. But no, great choices. Thank you. So we always kind of end with a final thought. And Tom and I will do this as well, but we give you the floor for a minute or two, just you can summarize, you can add something we haven't talked about, you can promote something, however you want to use the time you can, and we hand it over to you.
Yeah, well, I do want to say, please visit Mount Cuba Center if you haven't. We're not depending on where you are, if you're in the Mid-Atlantic region, we kind of pride ourselves on the number of botanic gardens that we have around. There's 30 gardens within 30 miles of us. So if you come to this area, please, stay and visit. We just opened up 2 miles of trails at Mount Cuba. We have a lot of education programs that you can sign up for. So please come to Mount Cuba. But just other than that, the one thing I think I wanted to say is just encourage you and not, don't get overwhelmed or down or discouraged on with invasive plants or deer pressure or anything. I think the one key takeaway that I've learned, again, I've said this a few times, is just like consistency, and being patient. So, come up with a plan, be targeted with it, and do it year after year after year, and be patient. So that's kind of the one thing that I wanted to kind of end with.
That's a fantastic final thought. You brought up education. We didn't even get a chance to talk to you about education.
Yeah. When we even set out our original list of guests we wanted to have, we're like, well, we're going to need to have on Nate from Mount Cuba and Sam from Mount Cuba and Eileen and Greg and we're going to have a whole year's worth of Mount Cuba episodes at one point.
Yeah.
So
Tom, would you like to go? Or
yeah. So mine is just going to key back on the deer management aspect. We've talked about it so many times about it's just a huge issue in our area, not across the country, but in the mid-Atlantic in particular. Our deer numbers are way too high. And Dr. Jay Kelly from Raritan Valley Community College, who's one of the biggest deer researchers on their impact of the habitat in New Jersey, he said it's an animal rights issue. You can't think about taking the life of the deer because they are preventing not just the plants to live, but all the things that require those plants. So yeah, you do have to remove numerous deer from the landscape, but you're allowing all these other a diversity of species to flourish, not just the plants, but all the insects that rely on them, all the birds that rely on those plants, or the insects that are feeding on those plants, and then all the way up the food chain. So it's a controversial topic, and I know there's a lot of people who, when that gets brought up, just kind of instantly tune out, but it's a necessary thing we need to talk about specifically with native habitats. So
awesome. That's a great point. So I think mine's pretty simple. Over the years, and I've known Mount Cuba for a long time, having lived in the area. I worked with Dr. Dick Leidy's son and Dr. Leidy involvement in Mount Cuba, and you always hear about the gardens, and rightfully so. But I learned a lot today, and I learned a lot about the natural lands. And again, that was part of the reason why we started this podcast, was all these great organizations that are doing great ecological things. Maybe everyone has a little bit different of approach, but we're all shooting or striving for the same end result. So, please, now that it's open, go visit Mount Cuba, go walk the 2 miles of trails, see what they're doing. It's a wonderful thing. And there's a lot more of these things happening that you may not even know about. So just make sure that, get involved. Are there ways that people can get involved other than just visiting? Are there volunteers? Are there ways to donate?
Yeah, we have a whole visitor program, visitor coordinator or volunteer program and volunteer coordinator. So we have a lot of volunteers at Mount Cuba. We also have some citizen science projects where you can get involved in too. So it's not just, you can not just come and visit Mount Cuba, but you can get involved through our volunteer program or citizen science program.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So get involved.
Yeah. Mount Cuba is doing as much or more than anyone else in the native plant space. So especially in the Mid-Atlantic, it's a great place to visit and help out.
It's a fantastic resource.
So with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed listening to Nate Shampine, right? Shampine. Okay. I nailed it the first time. But from Mount Cuba Center. For more information, you're going to go visit their website, which Fran did not put in here for me.
I didn't put it in.
But we'll have the link on our website, so you can go visit their website.
Do you know the website link off the top of your head?
Yeah, so it's just www.mtcubacenter.org. So mountcubacenter.org, mtcubacenter.org.
All right, awesome.
So visit there, and then you'll learn a lot more. I know we both did one just researching for this episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Native Plants, Healthy Planet, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
We're giving a huge thank you to the Egocentric Plastic Men for contributing our theme music. Besides streaming or buying their songs wherever you consume music, live music is back. So you can see Egocentric Plastic Men at the Grape Room in Manayunk, PA on July 30th, along with one of my Philly faves, Andorra. You can follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery, YouTube at Pinelands Nursery. And don't forget about the question and comment line. The calls have been coming in steady and still no Saul, but a lot of other great calls. 215-346-6189. I will repeat that. 215-346-6189. Ask a question, leave a comment, and we'll play it on a future episode of The Buzz and respond to it. And don't forget the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. A ton of new members again. It's great to see all the interaction. So keep it going.
So you can buy the Native Plants Healthy Planet t-shirts by going to our website, www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. There's a banner on the top. Just click that banner. It'll take you to our Teespring store. And like we said in the beginning, we aren't making any money off this. All of it is going to our guests in some fashion or another. And so they can keep doing the great things that they're doing. So visit our website for links from the podcast, and then also check us out at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, really wherever you consume your podcast. When you're there, please leave us 5-star review and hit subscribe and share this with a friend. All those things are really great ways to help spread the message and
make that circle bigger.
Yeah, make that circle bigger. So with that, thanks everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone. We will have a Buzz episode coming up next week, and it will be, I guess we're talking about invasives, or what is an invasive. So until then, keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.